Good afternoon to everyone. Sorry to keep you waiting. I was caught in some of the storm traffic. A trailer overturned up in I-55, so it took a little bit longer to get back here. And that first reminds me that I want to make a remark about the storm damage last night. We were very fortunate not to have any loss of life, but there are many that have homes destroyed or damaged, as well as tens of thousands of Arkansans without power. So I want to express my thanks to our emergency responders and to our electric power companies and utilities that are trying to get the power restored as quickly as possible. Secondly, and that's the purpose of having this news availability today, is that yesterday there was a Senate Bill 519 that was filed that would separate the recognition of Dr. Martin Luther King from the state holiday of Robert E. Lee. I have indicated previously that I generally support the separation of these two holidays. Now that the legislation has been filed, I am pleased to announce that I support and endorse this legislation, and that I'll work to see that it is fairly presented to the legislature and seek its passage. I believe that this is very important for the state of Arkansas for a number of reasons. I want to thank Representative Grant Hodges for his sponsorship of it, and Senator Dave Wallace. I also want to express my thanks to the Legislative Black Caucus, who has been instrumental in suggesting word changes and technical changes and in the drafting of it, as well as the NAACP for their consistent support of this initiative. The legislation is an education bill. It emphasizes that the Commissioner of Education shall develop the materials or units for the teaching of historical contributions by African Americans in the United States and specifically emphasizing will be put on the historic work of civil rights leaders, including Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his pursuit of justice in civil society. The education requirement goes further and says it shall be taught as appropriate in the classroom and shall be specifically taught in conjunction with corresponding state and federal holidays. The legislation goes on and gives provision to the Department of Education in relation to its curriculum and units on the American Civil War, with an emphasis that this shall be placed upon civilian and military leadership during the period, and how the lessons of that era can inform contemporary society. And so this legislation not only separates the holidays and gives Dr. Martin Luther King a holiday that is separate and distinct unto himself, but it also sets forth an education requirement and an emphasis upon teaching the civil rights movement during the holiday celebration. The purpose of me putting this emphasis in this news conference today on this legislation is that I want to make the case to the people of Arkansas that this is important for us as a state. And we've talked about it some, but we really haven't focused on the reason that it is important. I believe that this is important to us, not just as a statement, but is important as a mark in history that we recognize in its fullest degree the contributions of Dr. Martin Luther King. It is a national holiday that is celebrated in a national context, but in Arkansas, whenever that holiday was adopted, we in essence gave the people of Arkansas a choice. And we said that you can celebrate the contribution of Dr. Martin Luther King, or you can remember on the same day General Robert E. Lee. And as you come up to the state capitol on that particular holiday, you see both names that are placed as the reason for the closing of the capitol in these offices. And so we're telling the people of Arkansas, you can take one or the other. I believe that is a wrong choice, it is a bad choice, and sends the wrong signal to Arkansans and to our young people. That choice that is there divides us as a state and as a nation. Dr. Martin Luther King has a legacy that should be celebrated by African Americans, but he has a legacy that should be celebrated by all Americans. And we should be united in that front and not divided by a choice that has been presented as matters of convenience or for other purposes. And so this holiday is for all Americans, and it should be set apart especially for the remembrance of that great civil rights leader, Dr. Martin Luther King. His courage, his conviction, his sacrifice that he made, and the lasting difference that he made for all of us in America. And that is the reason that this legislation not just separates a holiday, but it also focuses on education. And it makes it clear that this should be taught in all of the schools of Arkansas. Black schools, white schools, Hispanic schools, all variety of schools should remember this incredible legacy and the importance of this particular moment in history. But it also gives us an opportunity to show respect for each other. We show respect for each other in terms of our heroes, in terms of our successes and our failures. And if we show respect to each other by this measure, then whenever we have times that want to divide us, whenever we are strained, whenever we have an incident that happens in our state, then I think we can reflect back on this as a moment of mutual respect, a moment of unity, and not a moment of division. And I think that's important for us as a state to accomplish. And I'm asking the Arkansas General Assembly to support this legislation as it proceeds through the legislative process. And I recognize this is not easy. I recognize this is an uphill battle, but I believe that it is the right thing to do for our state. And that's the reason I'm asking for that support. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
You mentioned the Legislative Black Caucus. Members of the caucus earlier this year had expressed reservations about the idea of still having some day set aside for property weed. Is the caucus on board with this, and also kind of broader with the legislature? How do you ensure this doesn't get bottled up in committee again, like it happened 2 years ago?
Well, I can certainly not guarantee it's not going to get bottled up in committee. There's no guarantee that this is going to get through a committee. There's no guarantee it's going to pass the legislature. All I can do is express my support for it and say that I believe that it is the right thing to do for the people of this state. And I've been, actually over the last year and a half, I've been making my case in quiet forums to legislators and sharing my thoughts on it. And I think there's a growing understanding of the need for it, and it's the right time for it. In terms of the Legislative Black Caucus, they've been very helpful in this. We've met numerous times. They've made suggestions in it. You'll have to ask them as to state their position. I think that would be the best thing on it, but they have been very helpful in this, and we've had an open line of communication with them, and I'm delighted with the confidence they've expressed that they would like to see this move forward.
Governor, some economic development officials have stated in the past that this precedent that we set, having Martin Luther King and General Lee on the same day, has negatively impacted our jobs recruitment. Have you had any conversations with your officials or knowing anecdotal instances of that, or are you concerned about that?
That's not my motivation, but that is a consequence. I know that, in my discussions with international companies in Arkansas, that, the image of the state has something to do with the ability to attract top talent here. And it's a broad-ranging image that we need to cherish. We have an image as the natural state. We have the we have an important history in the civil rights movement. And I would like to think that we are remembered by the Little Rock Nine that is outside the Capitol grounds, their monument to them and their history and legacy. And so it's a growing history, it's a changing legacy, it's a changing remembrance, but I think this would not only be the right thing to do and would help us to unify the state, bring us together, but I do believe that it would help advance the image of the state of Arkansas as one that is receptive to all and that respects minorities, and that we're beyond the division of the past.
Why does Robert E. Lee deserve a Memorial Day in your view?
And so right now, of course, you have a state holiday that's designated for Robert E. Lee. This would move it as a Memorial Day, a day of remembrance, into October. Why do I think that's important? Because the military, as the legislation says, and it doesn't address that specifically, but in general, we can learn from the military leaders during the Civil War era, whether they're Union military leaders or whether they're Confederate military leaders. You learn from their successes, you learn from their failures, you learn from their mistakes, and we try to apply those principles in today's life. Robert E. Lee was the leading general of the South, and so he would certainly be in that mix. He's a historic figure, and so he would not have a state holiday, but he would have a day of remembrance. Last October, for the first time, I actually issued a proclamation. No one noticed it, and that's okay, but I issued a proclamation that did reflect on the historic leadership of Robert E. Lee and ask people to reflect back on his contributions in life, both including after the war.
On the education requirements, so there's going to be an emphasis placed on the Civil War era and then again on the Civil Rights era, but there's kind of a historical gap in between there, given like the history of Jim Crow and things like that. Do you feel that there should be emphasis placed on that era, how discrimination unfolded over time in education requirements?
You mean in terms of the Jim Crow era?
Yeah.
Well, I don't think you can talk about the civil rights era and the contributions of Dr. Martin Luther King without talking about the Jim Crow laws and the errors that we had as a society in minority oppression. And so I think that will be naturally taught. It is careful in this bill not to dictate what is taught. We want to leave that to the Commissioner of Education and our educational historians and teachers. A lot of academic freedom here, but it is clear that it should be taught, and that is what the directive is from this legislation.
Splitting this holiday was part of the priority list that you put out ahead of the session, your state priorities. That was 2 months ago. What did it take to get this legislation here today?
Well, it took getting a lot of other legislation passed, and so there was a window to present this. But also, it took a lot of discussion with legislatures, both with the leadership and with the House and Senate members, to let them know I wanted this to be presented this year with a good tone, respectful of both sides of this issue, and those that want to make sure that we don't start demolishing all of our history. And I wanted them to understand my heart on this. And so it took a lot of work and preparation, but also I think we've refined the legislation really to make it better, to make it an educational bill, to emphasize that side of it as well as separating those holidays. And I came to the conclusion that this legislation is really about honoring Dr. Martin Luther King. it's not about dishonoring anyone. It's about honoring Dr. Martin Luther King and having a separate day of recognition for him. And what I said about the false choice, it's not a false choice, it's a real choice that is gives Arkansans the sense that we are divided, and we want us all to be united in the celebration of that day.
What makes you say this is going to be an uphill battle? I guess, have you already started counting heads on this? Is there already resistance that you're seeing?
Well, I'll tell you, I respect those that signed up and said they'd be sponsor this legislation. There were some that said they would not, because it's a controversial piece in some venues, and I've lived through it myself, just in terms of my political life, and I understand there's still a lot of sentiment that is left over from the Civil War, believe it or not, and so. You know, it's a difficult issue. That's just the way it is. But it's the right approach to it, and I think there's a growing receptiveness to it in the legislature, and I'm looking forward to them considering it.
Is the education component partly to make sure it gets to the education committees as the agencies should get to bring their forum?
The education part of it is because it's important that be taught in the classrooms. Steve?
You spoke earlier about the importance of advantage in terms of economic development and also showing respect for one another. You've also previously said that you see no need for the sort of legislation that Mr. Stubblefield has approved, the gender identity management bill. Have there been any further discussions between the administration and the senator on that, or are they not last?
There's been some. They know my view on that legislation, and I do believe there's a growing recognition within the legislature that this is not needed. Even after I've made my clear statements that I'm opposed to the facilities type legislation because it's not needed, President Trump and his administration reversed the previous guidance from President Obama. And so, you win in the courts, you win in the administration, it's handled locally. There's just a recognition that that's the way it should be handled, and legislation is not needed. So there hasn't been a great deal of further communications, but I think there's a growing understanding that there's not really any need to pursue that.
Unrelated, is there anything new on discussions of compromise on the guns on campus bill?
I don't believe there's anything new to report.
You talked about at the beginning, you came across the damage, or I don't know if you went and looked at the damage, but do you expect a declaration of emergencies for any of those counties or anything like that?
We're monitoring that. I know that I believe one county, the county judge has already declared a request for assistance, and so we're monitoring in terms of the cost value, and I would expect some action on that. I was actually at Big River Steel for their grand opening, which is a great success for our state. And as I was going there, there was a tractor trailer rig that was blown over and blocking the highway. And so that delayed me significantly, but it also showed the force of the winds that we had to deal with last night. And that's what caused a great deal of the damage and the power outages.
Governor, we got a few days left before the deadline for bill filing. You've had a pretty successful run up until this point. Are there any additional priorities that you have ahead for the rest of the session? You know, we still have highways, the issue of highways, budget, the internet bill, things like that. What are your additional priorities moving?
I think there were 13 bills I outlined in my agenda. We're have most of them passed. We're still working on a couple, but I don't anticipate any new agenda items that I will be introducing. There are the normal technical correction bills and things that pop up that have to be done. The highway bill that Representative Douglas filed certainly will be a topic of debate. I've made a statement on that just in terms of any new revenue stream for highways should be referred to a vote of the people, which that does include, and I look forward to the legislative consideration of that. With that, thank you all very much today for giving me this opportunity to make my case.